Welcome to the Psychedelic Integration Compass, your guide to unlocking the evolutionary potential of psychedelic medicine and conscious navigation. I'm your host, Clara Parati. I specialize in psychedelic integration, psychosynthesis, and holistic well-being. On this podcast, we'll explore different tools and practices for expanding consciousness and integrating change through your psychedelic journeys. Today, we dive into the Clara medicine wheel, an ancient healing system from the Peruvian Andes that can be used for integration and personal growth. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. I'm your host Clara, and joining me today is Star Weaver, a shamanic healer and teacher and the founder of Naya Cho, which is a shamanic training based on the teachings of the Clara medicine wheel. I'm so glad that she can make it here today. I'm also learning from her. Hi, Star Weaver. How are you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And it's great to have you here. So tell us a little bit more about you. How did you embark on this journey with shamanism and psychedelic medicine?
I was invited to go to a fire ceremony, and I was like, what is a fire ceremony? What's that? What happens to a fire ceremony? And I didn't have a clue what was going to unfold. I just got told to come along and you'll see what unfolds. So I was like, okay, I just feel like I really need to do this. I was already trained to be a medium, trance medium, and the mediumship world is very beautiful and it's all about the connection with your spirit guides, etc. But there was something missing for me, and I felt like my guides actually led me to the fire in many ways. And to keep the story short, I landed up at this fire ceremony, and there was a lady who was a shaman who was holding the ceremony. And as soon as she started talking and opening space, as we call it, and calling in all the directions, and started to sing around the fire, my guides were so excited. They were dancing around the fire and around me. And I was still a little bit rigid because it was all quite new to me, you know, this singing and rattling around the fire and letting yourself go and dancing. And all of a sudden, this energy just came over me, like this happiness. I can't describe it, but it was like this overwhelming happiness that I needed to just close my eyes and go with what was happening and watch what my guides were showing me. And all they kept saying to me over and over again is, you're in the right place, you're in the right place, you're in the right place. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. Wasn't till after we had the fire ceremony, and then we did a share, and we had some food afterwards. We were all talking to everyone, as you do after these things, and everybody was talking about the medicine wheel and ayahuasca and all the different types of things that people were doing at that day. And in that time, it was quite underground. It wasn't as popular as it is now. So it was all quite secret. So I'd never heard of any of this stuff. And my ears just went bing. It's like, oh, what's all this about? But that ayahuasca thing, I'm not sure about that because it sounds like drugs to me. So I put that to one side. And I just heard people talking about this medicine wheel, and it's about connecting to these different archetypes, guides, and the different healing that you could get from each particular archetype. And the lady that was running the fire happened to mention that she's starting an introduction course. Literally, it was 2 weeks later. And then I just felt like, and many people that step on this path, when they do the introduction courses with myself, it's like they feel like they're coming home. There's something just inside of you goes, I feel like I'm at home. And even as I'm saying this, I feel like I've got goosebumps all over my body, because that's the feeling I had. It's like a deep remembering and knowing of something. And that's kind of where it all kicked off for me. And the medicine wheel was where it all began. And that led me on to do the ayahuasca and train in the Amazon, and did a 6-year apprenticeship with grandmother, as we call her, or ayahuasca. She's known by many names. But it was always the medicine wheel that was the foundation for me. Ayahuasca took over for quite a while because that's what the medicine does. And it's very demanding. And it was a massive, beautiful experience. And I do not regret any of it. Absolutely excelled me on my path. But the medicine also kept reminding me where the groundwork is.
Yes, what a good point about where the groundwork is, because a lot of the time it's not clear when people first start with plant medicine, especially there's a tendency to go to a lot of ceremonies and a lot of circles and not really take time in between to implement the teachings, to digest the teachings that have come through the experiences. And so it's great to hear your story, and you're fortunate to know that from the beginning where the groundwork was. I mean, it took me a while at the beginning to figure it out. And then it's all about how what you do then with the experience. And of course, like the Care Medicine Wheel is such a beautiful system for personal transformation and integration. So it can be really used for integrating psychedelic experiences as well. And I really believe that it's really important to have some kind of shamanic understanding when you're working with people that take plant medicine. So, for example, with my integration clients, I bring quite a bit of shamanic principles into the work that I do. So I work with transpersonal psychology, and I bring in these teachings that I've learned from the medicine wheel into what I do with people as well, because they really, really help. And we go more into it in a moment, into the details. But I think it's it's really good to merge these different worlds, the shamanic world and the world of like more Western psychology and whatever someone is into for their own integration, because it's different for everyone anyway. Let's go back to the Care Medicine Wheel now. Obviously, there are many medicine wheels in the Americas. It's quite spread out as a healing system. And the Care Medicine Wheel comes from the Andes, from Peru, and from a particular tradition. So could you tell us a little bit more about the tradition of the carers?
The tradition or the lineage, they prophesize this in many cultures, but from the Caro lineage, the prophecy of Pachakuti is so Pachakuti was the Inca king, so he was the one who created Machu Picchu. So it was a very big time of abundance. There was lots of gold, lots of beautiful sacred energy. There was, as we all know, how the stones were placed there. There was lots of, let's call it alien technology that helped sound. You know, they had all these advanced frequencies and technologies and access to that. And Pachakuti was the Inca king of that time. I think it was around the 1400s. Don't quote me on the time. And obviously the Spanish invaded and he died. And in the time that he died, he chose as a spirit, which we all have a choice to at some point if we decide to. He decided to become an ascended master. And his role was to be the keeper of the upper worlds, or keeper of heaven, if that's what you want to call it, but we call it the upper worlds in this lineage. And the prophecy of Pachakuti is the time, it was about 500 years ago, they were told when the lagoons started to dry up, when the mountains, the snow caps started to melt, it was time to start sharing the prophecies. But they needed to hide for some time in the mountains to stay away from the Westerners, because we were seen as the ones, a bit like the time of Atlantis, the ones that would make the earth fall. And that is still unfolding as we speak. But around about 1990s is when they all started to come down from the mountains. It was a little bit earlier than that, but generally quite a few of them started to come down because all these prophecies started to happen. There was also a prophecy about them finding a sun energy, and there was an earthquake and something opened up in the earth and they started to see this light. And that was another part of the prophecy. I can't remember the complete explanation of it. So they all started to come down and start sharing all the wisdom and teachings from 500 years before of this time of Pachakuti, so which would be a time of chaos. So there would be many earthquakes, floods, a time when humanity will have this massive purge, which is happening as we speak. It's been happening for quite some time. But since 2012, it's just been on another level of chaos, should we call it? But it's also beautiful at the same time, because the prophecy is that it's the time of the new earth. So anything that's new, it's like birth. It has to be this process that you go through for this rebirth to happen. And we are actually on the cusp of this new earth in this time. And the Keros and all the beautiful teachings that they bring down is to align us all to that new earth energy. So it's to not necessarily remove, but help us to let go of anything that's not aligning to that new earth energy.
Yes.
And there's many modalities within the medicine wheel, which we maybe label as different things in this time, but they had the knowledge of it way back then as well.
It's amazing how accurate the Pachakuti prophecy is in relation to what's happening in the world right now. And what I love about it is also this willingness to teach foreigners and Westerners, because that is part of the prophecy too, because a lot of indigenous cultures are quite reluctant to do that, but that is part of their prophecy. And I guess that comes from this need of wanting to reconnect people to themselves, to nature, and to save the planet ultimately and create this new earth, like you were saying. And it's one of the reasons why I felt so drawn to this shamanic training and I took it up. Is the prophecy is really quite beautiful. And yes, so let's go back to the medicine wheel now and talk about it in a little bit more detail. So the wheel is based on the 4 directions, and it moves from the south to the west, to the north and the east. And each direction has a different animal archetype. And each archetype has a different healing frequency. So we'll be talking about these 4, and also we'll be relating it back to how this journey through the wheel can be really useful for working with plant medicine and for integrating plant medicine, because it's a journey of transformational personal transformation anyways, and these archetypes can be really used to do a lot of kind of, as we're saying, groundwork and take the inner work that we're doing a lot further as well. So let's start from the south.
The south is the beginning of the South American, Peruvian, Andean Cairo medicine wheel. There's so many names for it now, but I call it the Cairo medicine wheel. So the south is where we begin the journey. The reason we start in the south is it's because it's with serpent. There's many names for serpent as well. Amaru, Sachamama, like serpent energy, which is obviously a snake. So we work with Kundalini energy. So that's spoken about in many different traditions as well. So all these things are, the evidence is out there for all of us. They just have different labels and different names. But serpent is the one where we begin, because she's the one that helps us to shed the past or clear any of the past that's affecting us in the now. Now, past stories, majority of the work is done with your inner child in the south. But you do cover some of your shadow work in the south, but that is more in the next direction. But that will come up definitely in the south. It's about letting go of all the stories that we all hang on to and we identify with, that's who we are. And once we do that, and we're free of all those stories, then we can become who we're meant to be. And it's a very deep process. There's lots of things that happen within it. In the south, people will receive the initiations of the archetypes, which is where you receive all the archetypes in initiation, which I'll speak about later. But with south, it's a very intense journey. Now, when people say to me they don't know what they signed up for when we do the training, I do warn you, don't I? Because it's not something to step into unless you're ready. It opens up lots of things that are hidden within you that you may have been slightly aware of, but there'll be layers and layers and layers of stories and memories, or not even from this lifetime, from parallel lives, past lives, that are all hiding all these stories within your body, within your energy field. and they're all playing out this story of whether it's just, for example, whether it's victim energy that constantly keep playing like a repeated record throughout your life. And Serpent will help you to identify all of these. For me, she's like, it's almost like she hunts all those parts of myself that I don't want to look at. So, for instance, if someone's had a medicine experience and the medicine, or through their self, their higher self, connecting to them through the medicine, has kind of shown them that their relationship's not working, there's stuff that needs to unfold, it may come to an end, or it may not, or it might even tell them sometimes that happens, that it needs to finish. That's quite hard, especially if you're married, you've got children, you've got a house together. There's lots of things that come with that. So for me, Serpent really helps people to unwind all the stories around that. Why you embarked on this relationship in the first place? What it was that attracted you to that person? So it's a process. A Serpent, she's not quick. So snakes like to uncoil slowly through our Kundalini, activating all of our chakras. But she starts in the root chakra, which is our survival, our fear, relationships, money, all those sorts of things. And they're the things that lots of people struggle with when they're shown or experience something on the medicine, and they really, really struggle to let go. I have known people that drink 11 times and they just can't surrender to the medicine. And they say to me, well, how do I let go? And I just say, you have to choose to let go. And they get really annoyed with me when I say that, because it is a choice. It's a choice just to let go, and then everything else will fall into place. But you just got to decide to let go and just trust that you're safe. After that, you've had that intense experience on the medicine, and then you go back home into your everyday life, and then you're just like, well, what do I do with all this information? How do I work with this? How does it unfold? And that's, for me, what each direction helps people to journey and travel through that process.
I was picking up on something that you were saying, that this is not a path to be taken on lightly. And I feel the same about plant medicine and psychedelics, because both the medicine wheel and psychedelic medicine work are not paths to be taken on lightly, because they open so many boxes in our unconscious as well. So what I found useful when working with serpent energy, one thing that stood out for me was working with mirrors, for example. And it's something that I use with my integration clients a lot as well. And there are different traditions that work with mirrors anyway, but I found that really useful about a serpent and for shedding stories, like you were saying, because it all starts from the way you relate. So with mirrors, you can bring attention to how you relate to the world, and what you project out into the world, and just look at what your world is around you. It will inform you about how you also relate to yourself. And not to say that what your external condition, that your external condition is a denominator for your self-worth, because you anyhow have intrinsic self-worth. But it will show you, be a way of like seeing what you're projecting out, like I was saying, and see how you're relating to the world. And that's really important, because then it will then tell you quite a lot about the way you're relating to yourself. Because, of course, the way we treat others is a reflection of how we treat ourselves as well. And if you can bring some real honesty to observing these mirrors, and an element of self-compassion, which can be hard, then you can start shifting the stories that you've created, because those stories are anyhow, they come from self-beliefs that we have adopted at some point in life, usually earlier on in life, to protect ourselves, because in some ways we felt that we were in survival mode. And but then the stories stay even when you grow out of them and you don't need them anymore. And this work with mirrors is so important. The key is the element of self-love, which can be very hard to do, to bring. Once that you notice a pattern or something that you do, and you realize it's something that is not bringing you anything good, and you realize you've done it for a long time and you keep doing it. Well, first of all, it's about embracing it, because there's a good reason why you behave the way you do. And as I said, it comes from something that was created in the past to protect you. And that is where you can learn how to kind of start bringing a bit of self-compassion to it, so that you can start embracing it and accepting it, that that's there right now. And then you can start shifting it, because obviously until you understand something, you can't really change it. You can only change it when you start understanding it. And in terms of integration as well, you can't really integrate something that you don't wanna face. You need to be able to look at it. But it's also the quality of the awareness that you bring to it, because if it comes from with the understanding of why you do what you do, and there is an element of like self-love and compassion for yourself, then it's easier to shed those stories and yeah, and change the narrative, like he was saying. So serpent work is so deep, and it's very much about letting go of what doesn't serve anymore, which can be, it takes the time that it takes. And now I'd like to move to the West, and let's talk a little bit about Jaguar.
Jaguar is the archetype that we work with after the South. So we go around the medicine wheel in a direction. So Jaguar is in the West. So the winds of the West, as we call it. So Jaguar is the archetype that we work with. So she helps us to face our fears. So we've done a lot of work with the past, allowing ourselves to let go of all those stories, patterns, and behaviors that aren't serving us. And then we move into the West with Jaguar. So she helps us to empower ourselves. So the jaguar is the only creature in the jungle that doesn't fear any other animal. She's so chilled. She just lays around in the trees. She doesn't really move unless she needs to eat or mate or whatever it is she's going to be doing. So she doesn't have any fear. And that's the medicine that she brings to people in the West. Jaguar also helps us to face our fear of death, because that's the most fearful thing that most people have in their life. It overpowers a lot of people's decisions, behaviors. Jaguar is the one that helps us to let go of all the past lives or parallel lives, all of this multi-dimensional part of ourselves, which they're playing out all at, there's probably about another 10 of me somewhere at this very moment, playing out these lives in other dimensions. And she helps us to identify these lifetimes, good and bad, where we can let go of any threads that are affecting us in this lifetime. Sometimes we need to bring wisdom in from them as well. It's not always about letting go. So she's the one that helps us to do that. She's also the one that works in the darkest shadows. So she's the one that works with your shadow, showing you the darkest parts of yourself, all the parts you hide from the world, and fearful of other people finding out about you. We all have those parts of us. We have moments where we want to scream and shout and kill everyone, because that's just the mood that we're in that day, and that's okay, because that's normal human behavior. But people hide it and hide it and hide it, and they want to be the good girl or the good boy because they want everyone to like them. And the shadow just kept getting buried and buried and buried until it turns into a little monster inside of us. And those little monsters can then attract energies that can interfere with the person. And I won't go into too deeply into it, but Jaguar helps us to eliminate and clear these heavy energies. We call it hoocher energy in the Andean tradition, but heavy energy and all that comes with that. So the darker side of the healing the world, because she has no fear. And she teaches us to have no fear as well.
Yeah, I like the fact that she's fearless and she sees in the dark, and I love Jaguar energy. And she also helps us to deal with the fear of death, like you were saying. And that makes me think about something that today I was in a class where we were talking about the connection between shame and the shadow. And we were also talking about shame, about how is a necessary emotion that we have developed for evolutionary reasons. Because what shame does, it gives you the opportunity to take a step back and pause and assess your behavior and reflect on it, and then rectify something or change it if needed before you reintegrate into the group, into the social group. And so it's actually a necessary emotion that we have developed for self-regulation, for where especially we used to live in hunter-gatherers groups, where if you behaved in ways that were unacceptable, then you would be marginalized and you would be pushed to the woods and you would die by yourself in the woods. So you actually needed to learn from your mistakes, or you needed to learn how to behave in a socially acceptable way. And of course, when shame becomes chronic and it gets distorted, it's a different story. But as a kind of feeling, as an emotion that we have in the spectrum of the emotions, is a necessary emotion that we have. We have it for a good reason. And that makes me think about parts of the self as well, these hidden parts that sometimes we feel ashamed of and we don't want to look at. And if we learn how to deal with the shame and we learn how to embrace this part and start having a dialogue with them, we can get so much from them, so many gifts too, and also much more integrity in that sense, as in we can renegotiate our relationship to these parts. And again, going back to the stories that we were saying about serpent before, some of these parts are very activated because, again, they want to protect us. And that's the work that I also kind of do in psychosynthesis, for example, working with parts, which is very similar to the shadow work that is done in shamanism. I mean, the principle is the same, and it's just the way of going about it is different, but we're working with the same thing anyway. And then, going back to the fear of death and what you were saying, that ultimately, again, shame and wanting to show ourselves for who we really are comes from wanting to preserve our lives, because in the days, again, if we behaved in a way that was unacceptable, then we would die. And what I like about psychedelics as well, for example, that they do help you really learning how to deal with the fear of death, because in the psychedelic journey there are these moments where you have these moments of ego dissolution. I wouldn't call it ego death, because the ego doesn't really die until you are embodied in a body. Then you will have an ego. It kind of still there, but then there are moments in psychedelic journeys where you connect to something so much deeper, to your soul, to the source of where you come from. And that can be so useful for letting go of control patterns, because wanting to control is very connected to the fear of death, and wanting to control your conditions, your situation, so that the ego can just carry on being as it is. So yeah, it's a really amazing archetype for dealing with all this, and the fear of death is a really big thing, because once you become more comfortable with the fear of death, it's actually easier to look at those parts that you never wanted to look at before, and then really get to know yourself in a much more profound way. So amazing archetype. Let's now move to the north, to Hummingbird.
As the wheel goes round, we move around from the south, the west to the north. So the north is hummingbird energy. So by the time you've gone through your process with the south, so allowing yourself to let go of the past, inner child work, the west with Jaguar, the darker side of our psyche, our shadow, we're working through that, releasing the shame and all that side of things. We can then come into hummingbird medicine. So hummingbird is all about, we call it the epic journey with hummingbird, because she takes us on that journey of, I call it the magical kingdom. She opens up our eyes. So each direction that you go into, you start to see through the eyes of that archetype. So it gives us it's almost like we put on a pair of psychic eyes that opens up other layers of ourself. And when we go into hummingbird, we start seeing through hummingbird's eyes, which is all about magic, joy, abundance, ancestral healing. We do in the north with hummingbird, and also soul retrieval work. So the reason we don't do soul retrieval work in the south and the west, which is when there's a lot of trauma and things, we only do it when we get around to the north, is because if anyone starts returning soul parts when they're in the south, they're not ready to come back because they haven't done the groundwork. That soul part doesn't feel safe until they've done a lot of the groundwork, and then we go into the north with Hummingbird. So she's the one that takes us on the epic journey, because we've cleared a lot of the way, ready for us to become who we're actually meant to be. A lot of more things open up for you. You start to see the world very differently. So even like a tree, when you're on plant medicines, you can see like all the lines around them, all the beautiful energy. You can see how it breathes. You can see that more when you're in this energy with Hummingbird. It's always been there. The plant medicines help us to access that part of ourselves. But then this beautiful archetype helps us to really see it all the time. Not all the time, obviously life is life. But when we're working with that medicine.
I really like what you're saying, that idea that it's always been with you, and then Hummingbird helps you see things more clearly and work with it in a deeper way. And I often felt like that on plant medicine journeys as well, where even the journeys that were quite challenging, where I was doing some heavy work, they always had an element of light, like an element of soul's wisdom. I don't know how to explain it, scattered around here and there in between the heavy work. And it makes me think about one journey that I had at the beginning when I first started doing plant medicine. And at the time, I was still quite wrapped in victimhood without realizing it. So I had this intention going into one ceremony that was like, okay, I want to really learn about deep acceptance. And then I didn't realize at the time that embedded in this intention was the idea that I wanted to accept what others had done to me. And obviously I didn't realize that I brought that into the ceremony. And then what the medicine did, he turned it around. And I spent hours the whole night revisiting all the mistakes that I'd made in my life, how I made people feel, all the chain of like, domino effects that had. And, and after a few hours, I was like, oh my God, I want this to stop. And I was like, okay, no, I'm doing this for a good reason. And once in a while, though, there was this kind of almost like a torch coming around that felt like purpose. And there was this understanding that I was doing this healing work for really like for a purpose, for a reason. There was an element of calling even in there, of doing this healing work, not just for myself. And I could really feel I'm not just doing it for myself. And that made it bearable as well to have this little torch coming around once in a while to help me with the process. And so, and also on the medicine wheel, I find sometimes that, I can find sometimes I'm really connected to source, to the transcendental. And then a couple of hours later, I'm back into the story and the conditioning, and it can happen. And so, just working, sometimes I feel like I'm more consistently working with serpents, but then I've got glimpses of either jaguar energy or of purpose, of hummingbird or vision, eagle. So I really kind of love this idea of having the elements, the archetypes, all archetypes working with us all the time. And then I guess it's what your soul is ready to tap into in that moment, what your soul needs the most. It will tap into that archetype, into that energy. So yeah, that's I really like that idea of having them around with us all the time. So now let's move to the east.
Yeah, just following on from what you just said, that is completely so. When you in the south you receive the archetype initiations, they're all within you, they're all growing, so they all are around you at that point, and they will make themselves known when they need to, and they will be like, you will be in one predominant energy, but that's not to say that the others would not be working as well. So that's beautiful that you had that experience. And yeah, the last but not least is the east that we work with, which is eagle and condor. Now, some people resonate with the eagle, some resonate with the condor. There's no right and wrong way. They both have exactly the same energies and wisdom and teachings. So in the east, we work with we work with future timelines. So we learn a bit like time travel. It's an easier way to describe it. So we are able to journey into future timelines and change the future before it's happened. bit like when we work with past lives. It's just the reverse of that. We also work with lower world soul contracts where we cancel out any contracts that are still playing out that we haven't been able to clear throughout the rest of the journey on the wheel. So these are like the last bits that we need to tie up, that we might still have this behavior or pattern that's still there, and even though we've done all this groundwork with the south, the west and the north, why is this still here? And that's where these contracts play out. They're not the same as the Akashic records, they're slightly different, but it's a similar scenario, where we need to cancel these things that we're contracted to, soul contracts. Then we do the death rites in the East. So that's where we are able to do the death rites for someone as a priest would. We can hold service for someone when someone's terminally ill. There's a bit like a death doulas. They go through a process with someone, and we can help clear their energies and their chakras of any traumas, so they don't take that karma, if you want to call it karma, into their next life. So it frees them before they move forwards. And in the East, we do a shamanic burial as well, because it's the completion of the wheel, but it's also the beginning of your next cycle on the wheel. So you do dig your own grave in the East, which some people are a little bit wary of, and some people are absolutely just cannot wait to get in there. Because by the time they've got to the East, they completely understand how powerful the medicine wheel is. They will get in there and they will be digging, their graves. And you think it's going to take them 8 hours, it takes them 2 hours, because they're so passionate about what they're doing. So yeah, it's very symbolic of a bit like what you said, the ego death. The old you that helped you all the way around that wheel is now, thank you for all the lessons and the teachings, but now I'm ready to step into a whole new part of myself. And that's what the East is, the completion of the wheel. But it's also the very beginning of another cycle, because the wheel never ends. It just keeps on going. It just gets easier as you go around it.
And that's the great thing about the wheel, that it's a never-ending journey. And every time you start on it again, you can go deeper with your process. You can keep realigning parts of yourself and discovering new parts that perhaps you didn't have access to before because there were blocks that now have been removed. And it's the same thing with psychedelic integration as well. It's just the healing gets deeper as you keep integrating. So I see integration as healing, and vice versa. I see them as one thing, really. Because I really think it's important to create this bridge between the ancient and indigenous practices and the academia and psychology in academia, even transpersonal psychology, which is more kind of soul-centered psychology. Still, it's good to create bridges especially between these kinds of psychology and shamanism. And it's the reason why I'm also having, I've created this podcast to create some bridges here and there between different disciplines, and really for kind of creating this holistic view of how someone can do their own healing and their own integration as well. And so, talking about bridges now, I'd like to know what you think about the future of shamanism and psychedelic medicine. And also, if you'd have any words to share for people who have just started on this path, but also for people who have been on it for a while.
So starting on this path, it is a minefield. There's so many things that can unfold when you embark on the plant medicine path. And it's people like you that are really there, that are preparing people before they even go into the journey. That is so needed, because I think some people just think, oh, yeah, I'll go and do that because everyone else is doing it. They don't actually understand what they're signing up for. It's so deep. You're working with your soul and all these parts of yourself on a soul level, and you're putting your hands in, whether someone's holding space for you or you're doing it for yourself, in these people's hands. And you need to know or be prepared of what may or may not happen, and also have the support to understand what's also going to happen in the process. Now, no one knows what's going to happen in anyone's journey. We're all very unique. If you go back to the medicine maybe a week afterwards, you've not done the work. You need things to unfold. You need time. You know, it took you 20 years to get to this point, or 40 years, or however long it took you to get to this point. It's not going to just happen overnight. The medicines are beautiful. They're amazing tools. They're magical. They're fantastic, but they're not a cure-all. You are. And that's where the work needs to happen afterwards. So yeah, I think the shamanic healing, shamanic therapies, psychotherapy, all of these will start coming together and working as one, which is where I'm being led, as well as I know yourself as well, is to integrate the old with the new. So yeah, no way's the right way, no way's the wrong way. They all work. They just will all start working together as one big modality within itself.
Yes, that's what I'm seeing as well. Well, we're getting close to wrapping up the episodes, and so tell us how people can get to know you more and get in touch with you.
Well, obviously, I teach the medicine wheel. That's my main line of work at the moment, is as the medicine's led me there. But the way to contact me is either through the website, or I'm on Instagram and Facebook if you want to follow on there. I'm got a very small group. It's not something that I only add people that are really interested in doing the work. And that's where I'm from. If you're really interested in doing the work, you'll be connected in with me and I will connect with you. If you're not really sure, then it probably won't happen, but who knows? Everything, I always say the right people will come to me at the right time, and they always do.
Thank you, Star Weaver, and thank you to our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on the Clara Medicine Wheel. I'm looking forward to seeing you soon. Bye. Thanks for joining us today on the Psychedelic Integration Compass. You can find the link to the podcast website in the details below. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like the video and subscribe to the newsletter to stay updated on what's coming next. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.